There is something God wants you to know. Before you make the decision, you've been quietly rehearsing in your mind. Not a decision you've announced, not one you've posted about or prayed out loud over in front of anyone. This is the one that lives in the in-between hours, the 2 a.m. thought that rolls in when the house is quiet and the weight of everything you've been carrying finally gets too heavy to pretend you can still hold it. The one that sounds like, maybe this isn't for me. Maybe I was wrong about all of it. Maybe I should just stop. That thought, that exact thought, that is what this message is about. Because what you are about to discover, and I mean this with a precision that might unsettle you, is that the moment you are in right now, this exact threshold, this almost done, this 1 foot out the door, this exhausted standing still, is not the end of your story. It is the hinge of it, the moment everything turns on. And if you walk away from it, you won't just be walking away from a dream or a season or a calling. You will be walking away from the very version of yourself that was forged in everything you just endured. So stay for 10 more minutes, because what God wants to say to you right now is not what you expect. Let me tell you what I see when I look at where you are. You have been faithful in a season that gave you very little back. You have shown up to the work, to the prayer, and to the obedience in a period when the returns were invisible. You have watched people who seemed less prepared, less committed, and less refined than you move into the very things you have been waiting on. And you said nothing. You smiled. You meant it, mostly. But there was a moment, maybe just one, maybe dozens, when you sat in your car in a parking lot or stood in your bathroom with the door locked, and you let the real feeling rise to the surface. Why is it taking so long for me? And then you pushed it back down. Because you didn't want to be that person. You didn't want to be someone who complained, someone who doubted, someone who gave up. So you kept going. You kept showing up. You kept saying yes when everything inside you wanted to say, I can't do this anymore. But here's what I need you to understand before we go any further. That exhaustion you feel right now, that is not a sign that you chose the wrong path. That is not evidence that God has forgotten you. That exhaustion is what happens when a person of uncommon purpose endures an uncommon amount of pressure. You are not breaking down, you are being broken open. And those two things feel identical from the inside, but they lead to entirely different destinations. Here is what I have not told you yet. There is a reason the breaking almost always happens right before the breakthrough. And by the time this message is over, you will understand why. Not as an abstract piece of faith talk, but as a structural, spiritual, and deeply personal truth about your own specific story. But first, I need to sit with you in the place you've actually been. Because most messages like this one skip past the wound too fast. They rush toward the sunrise without sitting in the dark long enough to honor what the dark actually cost you. And you deserve better than that. So let me name it for you. Let me say what you have not said out loud. There was a night, maybe many nights, when you knelt down and prayed and the ceiling felt like concrete. You said the words. You believed them, or you tried to believe them, which is its own form of courage. You told God what you needed. You asked Him to move. You waited, and then you waited some more. And the silence that came back was so complete, so total, so heavy, that it stopped feeling like peace and started feeling like absence. You prayed, nothing changed. You prayed again. The situation worsened. You kept praying. And at some point, you may not even be able to identify the exact moment a part of you began to wonder whether the prayers were hitting anything at all. That is not a spiritual failure. That is a human being in the wilderness, and every person God has ever done anything significant through has stood in exactly that wilderness. There was a relationship, maybe a friendship, maybe a family bond, maybe a partnership in ministry or business or life that you poured into with everything you had. You gave it your best hours, your most careful attention. the parts of yourself you don't show most people. And somewhere along the way, that relationship began to pull back, or turned on you, or simply dissolved, quietly, without the dramatic confrontation that might at least have given you something to process. It just left, and you were standing there holding the empty space where something real used to be, wondering what you did wrong, wondering if something was wrong with you, wondering whether the next time you open that much of yourself to someone, the same thing will happen. There was a door you knocked on for so long that your knuckles are still metaphorically sore. A job, a ministry, a creative calling, a vision you received in prayer and then spent years trying to walk toward. You did everything right, you prepared, you positioned yourself, you stayed obedient when obedience cost you something, and then the door didn't open, or it opened a crack and then shut, or someone else walked through it, someone who you knew in your gut was not more qualified but more connected, or more comfortable, or more willing to compromise in ways you were not. There and watch. And you told God, okay, your will, not mine, and you meant it, but you also grieved it in a way that nobody ever fully saw. And here is what has been sitting underneath all of it, the thing I want to give you permission to feel, because you have been quietly ashamed of it. You are tired of being the person who endures. You are tired of being the one who holds on when others let go. You are tired of hearing, your season is coming, when the season continues to not come. You are tired of being an example of faithfulness to people around you, when faithfulness feels like it is costing you everything and returning almost nothing. You are not tired of God. You are tired of the gap between what you believe and what you can see. That tiredness is not sin. That is a soul that has been carrying weight longer than anyone sees, and it is real, and it is valid, and God knows every single ounce of it. If you have ever felt like your faithfulness was completely invisible, like you have been showing up in the dark with no audience and no applause and nothing to point to, type the word "seen" in the comments right now, because what you are about to hear is going to permanently change the way you understand what this season has actually been building. Now, I need to show you something, and I need you to let go, for just a moment, of the story you have been telling yourself about this season. The one where you are behind, where you are forgotten, where the delay is evidence of disqualification. Because that story is not the true story. It is the visible story, and God has never worked primarily through the visible. What looked like abandonment was actually architecture. What felt like silence was actually construction. Think about Joseph. And I mean actually think about him, not the Sunday school version that skips too quickly to the palace. I mean the version of Joseph who sat at the bottom of a pit, put there by his own brothers, listening to them eat their lunch above him while he sat in the dark, wondering what he had done wrong. The version of Joseph who was sold as a commodity, who was trafficked across borders, who arrived in Egypt with no money, no network, no reputation, no family, and no rights. The version of Joseph who did everything correctly in Potiphar's house, who was faithful, capable, and morally upright, and still ended up in prison for a crime he did not commit. Here is what should arrest you about that story. The text doesn't slow down to give Joseph a breakdown scene. It doesn't give us 3 chapters of Joseph questioning God's goodness. What it gives us instead, almost without commentary, is this: but the Lord was with Joseph, in the pit, in the trafficking, in the false accusation, in the prison, in the years of forgotten promises. The Lord was with Joseph, not watching from a distance, with him, in the middle of the most disqualifying, most humiliating, most inexplicable chapter of his life. What looked like Joseph's story being destroyed was actually Joseph's character being formed into something that could carry the weight of what came next. The pit was not a pause in Joseph's purpose. The pit was a prerequisite for it. C.S. Lewis said something that I want you to hold in your hands right now. In Mere Christianity, he wrote, "Imagine yourself as a living house. God comes in to rebuild that house. You thought you were being made into a decent little cottage, but he is building a palace. You thought this season was reducing you. You thought the pressure was proof of diminishment. But what if the renovation feels like demolition, because what is being built is larger than what you imagined for it? Yourself. What if God is not making you smaller through this suffering? What if he is making you structurally capable of holding something you could not have held before it? The palace requires a different foundation than the cottage, and foundations are always invisible. Foundations are always underground. Foundations are always built in seasons that, from the surface, look exactly like nothing is happening. What felt like God's silence was actually God's precision. What looked like your ceiling was actually your floor. There is a greenhouse principle at work in your life that most people never understand because they only look at it from the outside. A greenhouse is dark. A greenhouse is humid and disorienting, and the conditions inside it feel like anything but growth. But what is happening inside a greenhouse is that a seed is being given every condition it needs to become something that cannot survive the open field yet. You do not move a seedling into the field before its root system can handle the wind. The greenhouse is not cruelty. The greenhouse is cared for. What you have been calling your wilderness is actually your greenhouse. And the roots that are forming in you right now, in the dark, in the silence, in the endurance, are the roots that will allow you to stand when the wind comes in the open field, because the wind always comes. And the people who were rushed into the field before they were ready are the ones who snap. But I have to be honest with you now, because everything I just told you is true, and none of it fully explains why you are standing at the edge of quitting. What brought you to this edge is not just the circumstances. The circumstances are hard, but you have survived hard circumstances before. What brought you to this edge is something more interior, something that has been quietly growing in the dark alongside you, and I need to name it directly, because love sometimes sounds like confrontation, not the angry kind, the precise kind, the kind that says, I see what is actually happening here, and I care about you too much to let you leave without knowing. There are three enemies at work in a season like this. The first is external, the opposition that is visible, the circumstances that are genuinely difficult, and the people or systems that have created obstacles. That is real. But it is not the most dangerous enemy you are facing. The second is the world system, the framework of comparison and metrics and visible progress that has been quietly convincing you that if you cannot see fruit, you are not growing, that if you cannot point to results, something has gone wrong. This framework is everywhere, and you have absorbed more of it than you realize. It measures growth in outcomes. God grows people in hiddenness. But the third enemy is the most dangerous. The third enemy is the old self, the version of you that learned somewhere early on that safety comes from control, that worth comes from productivity, that love must be earned through performance, that if you are not visible, you do not matter. The old self has been watching this season very carefully, and the old self has been whispering to you a story, a plausible, evidence-based, emotionally resonant story about what this silence means. The old self says, this is evidence you were wrong. The old self says, the people who told you this wouldn't work were right. The old self says the sustainable thing, the wise thing, the realistic thing is to lower your expectations and protect yourself from further disappointment. The old self does not arrive with a pitchfork. The old self arrives as wisdom, as maturity, as a reasonable interpretation of the evidence in front of you. Right now you are thinking, but what if the old self is right? What if I have been holding on to something that was never supposed to last this long? What if I'm calling stubbornness faithfulness? That is a fair question. And the answer is this: those are not the same thing, but they can feel identical from the inside. Here is how you tell the difference. Stubbornness is the refusal to be corrected. Faithfulness is the refusal to abandon what God has confirmed. Stubbornness says, I will not change. Faithfulness says, I will not quit what I was called to, but I will let God change me in the doing of it. The question is not whether you should keep going. The question is who you will be when you do. Because here is what the enemy understands that you may have forgotten. The moment right before a breakthrough is the most dangerous moment in any story. Not the hard middle, not the early resistance. The moment right before the door opens. Because that is the moment when exhaustion and the old self and the world system and every piece of evidence in front of you can be organized into a coherent argument for giving up. The enemy does not need to destroy you. He only needs to convince you to walk away before the moment arrives. Lewis, writing as the senior demon Screwtape to his nephew Wormwood, described the enemy's strategy with unsettling clarity. The safest road to hell is the gradual one, the gentle slope, soft underfoot without sudden turnings, without milestones, without signposts. He is not coming at you with something dramatic. He is simply making quitting feel like the reasonable choice. Making surrender feel like wisdom, making a retreat feel like self-care. This is not the moment for self-protection. This is the moment for clarity about who you actually are. If this is describing your exact situation, if you have been living in an agreement with an old story that says you are not enough, not chosen, or not worth sustaining, type "This is me" in the comments below. You are not alone in this. And you are not stuck here, so here is what you do, not as vague spiritual advice, as specific, practical, embodied action for a person in exactly your season. The first step is this: name the agreement and refuse it out loud, not just in your heart, out loud, because the old self lives in the space between thought and declaration, and it thrives in silence. There is an agreement you have made, maybe without realizing it, that says something like, I have been praying too long for this. Or the evidence suggests God is not moving here. Or, people like me don't get what they've been believing in. That agreement is not just a thought. It has become a lens. It has been filtering everything you see, shaping every interpretation of every delay, every silence, every moment of apparent non-progress. And you cannot defeat a lens you have not identified. So today, not tomorrow, not when things feel better, today you find a quiet room or a parked car or a corner of your house and you say out loud, I have been living in an agreement that said the specific thing, and I refuse it, not because the circumstances have changed, not because I have new evidence, but because that agreement is not consistent with who God says I am. I choose God's word over what I can see. This is not a magic formula. It is not a 3-second fix, but it is the beginning of the realignment that makes everything else possible. You cannot walk forward with any power while you are still living inside a framework built for retreat. The second step is this: do the next faithful thing, the smallest possible version of it. When you are this depleted, the temptation is to either quit entirely or to try to manufacture a heroic comeback effort that matches the scale of what you have lost. Both of those are wrong. The heroic comeback effort will exhaust you further and set you up for a harder fall. Quitting will cost you the very thing this entire season was building toward. What you need is neither. What you need is one small faithful thing done today, in the direction of what you were called to. Not the whole thing, not the grand version, the seed version. Write one paragraph. Make one phone call, say one prayer that is actually honest, open the document, walk back into the room, light the candle. Do the one small thing that says to your own soul, I am still in this. Because the soul does not run on inspiration, the soul runs on decision. And one faithful decision made in the dark, when nothing is visible, is worth more than 100 faithful decisions made in the light, when everything is working. It is those dark decision days that will become your testimony. Think of Elijah under the broom tree in 1 Kings 19. He had just come off one of the most dramatic demonstrations of God's power in the entire Old Testament. And then Jezebel sent one threatening message, and he ran into the desert, sat under a tree, and asked God to let him die. He was done, he was finished. He was one step from quitting. And what did God do? He did not rebuke him. He did not give him a vision of the future. He sent an angel with food and said, "Get up and eat. The journey is too great for you." The next faithful thing, not the whole journey, the meal, the rest, and then the next thing after that. The third step is this: change the community of voices around your inner life. This is the one people resist the most, because it requires the most honesty. But you have been listening to voices, inside and outside yourself, that have been slowly draining your faith rather than feeding it. Some of them are people you love. Some of them are platforms you follow. Some of them are your own memories, your own replayed failures, your own mental recordings of everyone who told you this was too much, too big, too unlikely. Those voices have been on loop, and they have been shaping your sense of what is possible. You do not cut off relationships, but you do become deliberate about whose voice gets access to your inner life during this season. You find one person, just one, who has survived their own version of this wilderness and who can look at you without pity and say, "I know what this is, and I know what comes after it." You read one thing each day that is not news, not metrics, not comparison, but living testimony of what God does in the dark. You intentionally, deliberately, daily redirect the diet of your inner life, because what you feed your spirit in a dry season determines whether you emerge from it rooted or collapsed. The fourth step is this: give God your honest prayer rather than your performed prayer. Because there is a kind of prayer that has been draining you rather than sustaining you. The prayer that says the right words and uses the right language and maintains the right posture, but doesn't actually say what you are actually feeling. That prayer is exhausting because it requires you to manage your image even before God, and God does not need your image management. He needs your honesty. Read Psalm 22, read Psalm 88, read the Psalms that do not wrap up neatly. My God, why have you forsaken me?" is a prayer. The darkness is my closest friend is a prayer. The Bible is full of people who told God exactly what they actually felt and found that honesty became the doorway back into real encounter. You are allowed to say, "I don't understand this. I'm exhausted, I'm angry, I'm scared. I'm holding on by a thread and I need you to meet me here." That is not a weak prayer. That is the most honest prayer, and honest prayer is the most powerful kind. The fifth step is this: remember the altar stones. In Joshua 4, when the Israelites crossed the Jordan River, God told them to take 12 stones from the middle of the riverbed and set them up as a memorial. Not so they would look impressive, not as a monument to success, as memory anchors, so that when their children asked, "What do these stones mean?" they could point to something physical and say, "Here is where God showed up when we had no idea how we were going to make it through." You have altar stones. Moments in your story, specific, dated, personal moments, when God showed up in a way that could not be explained away, when the provision came from nowhere, when the door opened against all logic, when a word came at exactly the right time. Go back to those stones right now, not as nostalgia, as evidence, as your factual, documented record of what God has already done, which is the most reliable indicator of what God is still doing. You are not starting from zero. You are standing on a foundation of demonstrated faithfulness. Remember it. Name it out loud. Let it be your argument against the agreement that says God has forgotten you. If this message is speaking directly into your season, if something in your spirit is responding to every word, subscribe to this channel and write the word "ready" in the comments. Because something is already shifting. I want to be here when the door opens. I want to tell you about someone, not someone famous, not a public testimony with a polished ending, someone ordinary in an ordinary city who sat in a season that looked exactly like yours for longer than seemed reasonable. She had been faithful in her calling for years, a creative work she believed God had placed in her hands. She had knocked on every door. She had done the preparation, made the sacrifices, and maintained the obedience. And for years nothing came back. Her community quietly moved on. The opportunities went to people who seemed less committed. She was 37 months into a season that was supposed to last 6, and she nearly stopped. She made the decision, wrote the note to herself, and gave herself permission to close that chapter. And then, the night before she was going to act on that decision, she sat in her car and prayed the most honest prayer of her life. She said, "God, I don't know if this was ever real, but if it was, I need you to show me. I have nothing left to give this, but I'm giving you nothing." 3 weeks later, the door she had been knocking on for years opened, and she walked through it carrying every single thing she had developed in the 37 months of invisible faithfulness. The season had not been wasted. Every day of it had been preparation for what she was walking into. She didn't know that while she was in it. She only knew it from the other side. You are not at the end of your story. You are at the hinge. I want to invite you to say this out loud, not just read it, but speak it right now, wherever you are. I am not quitting, not today. Not because I am not tired. I am tired, and God knows it. But because what has been built in me during this season is real, and it belongs to something larger than I can currently see. I refuse the agreement that says I am forgotten. I refuse the agreement that says this season is evidence of failure. I refuse the voice that calls retreat wisdom and calls endurance foolishness. I am not the person who walked into this season. I am someone who has been formed by it. Something has been happening in the invisible that I am only beginning to understand. I am still here. I am still in this. And I am walking toward what God has prepared, even when I cannot see it yet. Let me show you where you will be 1 year from now if you do not quit today. A year from now, you will be standing in a season of fruit, not because everything got easy, but because the roots you grew in this season gave you the stability to hold what is coming. You will sit across from someone who is where you are right now, at the edge of quitting, exhausted, one step from walking away, and you will say to them with complete authority, "I know what you are in. I know how dark it is. I know how rational quitting feels, and I know what is on the other side of this moment, because I was standing exactly where you are, and I stayed." A year from now, the very season that almost broke you will be the source of your most powerful witness. The very darkness you walked through will be the light you offer to someone else. You will not have escaped suffering. You will have been transformed by it into someone who can speak into it. That version of you exists. That version of you is waiting on the other side of today's decision not to quit. Let me pray with you. God, I come to you on behalf of the person who is reading this right now. You know exactly where they are. You know the specific weight they have been carrying, the specific doors they have knocked on, the specific nights they endured in silence. You know the exact shape of their exhaustion, and I believe that you brought them to this message today because you are not done with them, because the season they are in is not a dead end, it is a corridor. Father, I ask you to meet them in the next 24 hours with something they cannot explain, a confirmation, a provision, a word from someone who could not have known what they needed, a quiet knowing in their spirit that the ground beneath them is not as shaky as it feels. I ask you to restore their sense of purpose, not with a dramatic sign, but with the steady return of their certainty that you are present and you are building something worth waiting for. And God, I ask you to protect them from the voice that calls quitting wisdom. Give them the grace to do one more faithful thing today, even from empty hands. We trust you with this. We trust you with the timeline. We trust you with the outcome, not because we are not exhausted, but because you have been faithful every single time before, and that record does not lie. Amen. If this prayer landed for you, if something shifted while you were reading it, type Amen in the comments below. And if you know someone who is standing at this same edge right now, someone who is one step from walking away from something God placed in them, share this video with them today. You may be the exact reason their season turns. You are not forgotten. You are not disqualified. You are not behind. You are not invisible. You are someone God brought to a specific message on a specific day for a specific reason. And that reason is this: the story is not over. The door has not been closed. The calling has not been cancelled. You are not someone who almost made it. You are someone who stayed.